Be me, some guy working in a mid-sized marketing firm. The job is fine, pay is decent, people are mostly normal, or at least they were. Our office used to have a pretty relaxed vibe. People would joke around, talk about sports, movies, whatever. We'd go for drinks after work sometimes. It was a solid team, a real collaborative atmosphere where you could actually get work done and not feel like you were in a concrete box for 8 hours a day. Then, about 2 years ago, the company hired Ella. At first, she seemed normal enough, smart, seemed competent at her job. But it didn't take long for the real her to start showing up. Little things at first. A sigh when someone told a harmless joke. A comment under her breath about the boys' club when a few of us were talking about a football game. We all just kind of ignored it. Every office has someone with a bit of an attitude. The first big incident was maybe a few months after she started. We were in a team meeting. The boss is outlining a new project. He's a decent guy, pretty hands-off as long as the numbers look good. He wraps up his presentation and says, "All right, guys, let's get to work on this." Ella clears her throat, loudly. The room goes quiet. She says that using the term guys is exclusionary and contributes to a workplace environment that doesn't feel welcoming to women. The boss was totally caught off guard. You could see the panic in his eyes, the fear of an HR complaint. He immediately apologized, saying it was just a figure of speech, and he would be more mindful in the future. Ella just gave this little satisfied nod. We all just looked at each other. It was super awkward. But okay, whatever. Small thing. We can adapt. From then on, it was team and everyone. Fine. Except it wasn't a small thing. It was an opening. She saw that management would fold instantly to avoid confrontation. So the crusade began to ramp up. It became a weekly, then almost daily occurrence. The office kitchen became a minefield. Someone would leave a coffee mug in the sink. Instead of just washing it or ignoring it, Ella would launch into a monologue about weaponized incompetence and how men are socialized to expect women to clean up after them. It didn't matter who left the mug. It was always a symptom of the patriarchy. Then we hired Lee. Lee was a young guy, fresh out of college, super enthusiastic, eager to please and make friends. A genuinely nice kid. On his first week, a few of us were chatting by the water cooler. Lee was telling a story about spending the weekend helping his dad fix up an old car. He was really proud of it, showing us pictures on his phone. He finished the story by saying something like, "It was tough, but it was real man's work, you know?" He meant it in the most innocent way possible, just a dude happy he fixed something with his dad. Ella was walking by. She stopped dead in her tracks. She turned to Lee with this look of a disappointed professor. She didn't yell. It was worse. It was a lecture. She told him that using phrases like that reinforces harmful gender stereotypes. She asked him if he thought a woman couldn't fix a car. She went on about how that kind of language creates an invisible barrier for women in technical fields. Lee just stood there, his face turning bright red. He stammered something like, "No, I didn't mean it like that, But she just talked over him. The rest of us didn't know what to do. Clyde, our senior designer, just kind of shook his head and walked back to his desk. Lee was totally deflated. For the rest of the day, he barely said a word. He went from this happy, outgoing kid to a guy who was scared to speak. That incident really changed the atmosphere. The casual chatter just stopped. The office became quiet. The only sounds were keyboards clicking and the printer running. No one wanted to be the next person to get a lecture. Any conversation that wasn't 100% work-related was had in hushed tones, almost whispers. If you saw Ella approaching, you just cut the conversation and pretend to be intensely focused on your screen. She was policing everything. One time, I was explaining a complex part of a new software to another colleague. Ella overheard me and later pulled me aside. She told me I needed to be careful about my tone because I was coming across as mansplaining. I was literally just doing my job. The colleague I was talking to had asked for my help. But in Ella's world, a man explaining something to a woman was an act of patriarchal aggression. So, I stopped offering help. Everyone did. If a female colleague had a question, you just point her to the official instruction manual. It was safer. The social dynamic of the office was completely broken. We weren't a team anymore. We were a collection of individuals trying to avoid getting into trouble. Ella, meanwhile, seemed to be thriving. She was the self-appointed queen of the office, the moral authority. She would walk around with this smug look on her face, like she had single-handedly civilized a tribe of barbarians. She seemed to feed on the tension. The fear she created was a source of power for her. Every time someone fell silent when she walked by, it was a victory in her eyes. She had all the attention, even if it was negative. The entire social orbit of the office revolved around her. This went on for the better part of a year. Morale was in the toilet. A few good people quit, citing vague reasons. The rest of us were just trying to survive. The turning point came on a random Tuesday, I think. It wasn't some huge dramatic event. It was small, almost insignificant. That's what made it so effective. Our team was up against a tight deadline for a major client. Things were stressful. We were all working late. Clyde was in charge of the final design elements. Clyde is one of those guys who is just incredibly good at his job. He's been with the company for over a decade. He's calm, professional, and everyone respects him. He's not a loud guy. He leads by example. He had been a bit of a mentor to a lot of us, including me. He had always been polite to Ella, but firm. He didn't engage in her debates, but he also didn't just cower like the rest of us. So, on this particular evening, Clyde was at his desk, deep in concentration, trying to solve a tricky design problem. The project manager was on the phone with the client, trying to smooth things over. Ella walked over to Clyde's desk. She wasn't even on this project, but she felt the need to insert herself. She looked at his screen and said, "You know, your posture is a perfect example of defensive male body language. It's very aggressive." Clyde didn't even look up from his screen. He was on a roll, in the zone, and her comment was just a fly buzzing in his ear. He just said, "Ella, not now, I'm busy." His tone wasn't angry. It was just focused, dismissive. Well, that was the wrong thing to say. She launched into it, accused him of having a condescending tone, said he was being dismissive of a female colleague's input. She started talking about how men use busyness as an excuse to ignore women's voices in the workplace. It was completely absurd. The fate of $1 million account was hanging in the balance, and she was lecturing him on his tone. Clyde slowly stopped what he was doing. He put down his stylus. He leaned back in his chair and finally looked at her. But he didn't look angry. He didn't look frustrated. He just looked tired. He stared at her for a few seconds without saying a word. The entire office was dead silent, watching this unfold. Then he just turned back to his computer, didn't say another word to her, just picked up his stylus and went back to work, completely ignoring her presence. Ella stood there for another moment, clearly expecting a fight or an apology. She got neither. She just got silence. Humiliated, she huffed and walked back to her desk. The spell was broken. Later that night, as we were packing up, I walked by Clyde's desk. I just said, "You okay, man?" He looked up at me, and there was this strange clarity in his eyes. He told me he had a revelation while Ella was lecturing him. He said he realized we had all been playing her game. The arguments, the justifications, the awkward silences, the apologies, it was all a form of attention. It was the fuel she ran on. He explained that arguing with her gave her a platform. Getting angry at her made her a victim. Ignoring her in a passive-aggressive way created tension she could manipulate. We were feeding the very behavior we couldn't stand. He said there was only one way to win. Don't play the game. I asked him what he meant. He said, "From now on, she gets nothing but professional courtesy. Not coldness, not anger. Just nothing. A gray rock." The idea was simple. All communication with Ella would be restricted to work-related topics only. It had to be polite, efficient, and completely devoid of any emotion or personal connection. No small talk, no jokes, no arguments, no debates, no reactions. She asks a question about the project. She gets a direct, concise answer. She needs a file. You email it to her with the subject line, "File attached." She starts a monologue about the patriarchy. You don't engage. You just nod politely and say, "Okay, I have to get back to this report now." The goal was to make interacting with her on a personal level as boring and unrewarding as possible, to give her a taste of the purely professional environment she claimed to want. It was brilliant in its simplicity. The next morning, the plan went into action. It wasn't a formal meeting or a memo. Clyde just quietly talked to a few of the other guys, myself included. The idea spread like wildfire. Everyone was on board instantly. We were so tired of the constant stress, we were willing to try anything. The first test came before lunch. Ella came over to Clyde's desk to, I assume, continue her lecture from the night before. "Clyde, about last night," she began. Clyde looked up from his monitor, gave her a brief, neutral look, and said, "Good morning, Ella. Do you need something related to the Henderson account?" She was thrown off. "Well, no, I wanted to talk about your tone." He cut her off, but not rudely. Just factually. "Okay, well, if you don't have any work-related questions, I need to finish these wireframes. The deadline is noon." He then turned back to his screen. He didn't ignore her. He acknowledged her, processed her request, which wasn't a work request, and then disengaged. Ella just stood there, speechless. Her script had been thrown out the window. She mumbled something and walked away. It was like watching a magician's trick. A few hours later, she tried a different tactic. She sent a group email with a link to an article about male privilege in the tech industry. In the past, this would have sparked a huge, soul-crushing debate that would derail the entire afternoon. This time, nothing. Not a single person replied. No one talked about it. No one even acknowledged it. It was just another email in a sea of emails. It had zero impact. We saw Lee walking towards the kitchen later. Ella was in there. A couple of us watched, worried he'd fall into a trap. She tried to engage him, asking him what he thought of the article. We saw Lee pause, think for a second, and then he just said, "Oh, I haven't had a chance to read it. I've been swamped with the quarterly reports. Excuse me." He got his water and walked out. Polite, professional. A gray rock. Ella was left standing alone in the kitchen, holding her phone. For the first time, she looked confused. The first week was all about her testing our defenses. She tried every trick in her book. She'd try to start debates. We'd politely decline, citing work. She'd make passive-aggressive comments. We'd pretend we didn't hear them. She'd try to be overly friendly, asking about our weekends. We'd give one-word answers and turn the conversation back to work. "How was your weekend?" "Good." "Did you get the memo about the server maintenance?" It was exhausting, but we held the line. The key was unity. Because we were all doing it, she couldn't single anyone out. She couldn't accuse us of being hostile, because we were always polite. She couldn't accuse us of ignoring her, because we always answered her work-related questions. We were just being professional, incredibly, unshakably professional. The office dynamic started to change again, but this time in a different way. The oppressive tension was gone, but it wasn't replaced by the old friendly banter. It was replaced by a calm, focused, but sterile quiet. At least, it was sterile whenever she was around. A funny thing started to happen. Small pockets of the old office culture began to reappear, but only in safe zones. 2 or 3 of us would huddle around a desk to talk about a game, but the moment we saw her coming, we'd disperse. Conversations at the coffee machine would be normal and human, but would instantly become about work if she entered the room. We created an invisible wall around her. She was there, but she wasn't part of the office anymore. She was an outsider in her own workspace. For the first month or so, she seemed to interpret our new behavior as a victory. She probably thought she'd finally beaten us into submission, that we were all walking on eggshells because we were terrified of her enlightened moral authority. She would carry herself with an air of smug satisfaction. She'd finally created the professional and unproblematic workplace she always wanted. We were just waiting. We knew that this wasn't what she wanted. She didn't want a professional environment. She wanted a stage, and we had just taken it away. We could see the first cracks starting to show after about 2 months. The smugness started to fade. It was replaced by a look of boredom. She would sit at her desk and just stare into space. She would try to start conversations, and they would be shut down with polite, work-related deflections. The energy she got from conflict was gone. The power she felt from correcting people was gone. The attention she commanded, even if it was negative, was gone. She was just another employee in a quiet office, and it was becoming clear that she hated it. We had successfully created a work environment that was perfectly tailored to her stated ideals, and it was driving her crazy. The next phase of her strategy began subtly. If conflict didn't work, maybe kindness would. She was trying to find a new way in. One Monday morning, she came in with a big box of expensive donuts from that fancy bakery downtown. She put them in the kitchen with a little handwritten note that said, "Happy Monday, everyone, Ella." In the old days, this would have been the start of a conversation. People would thank her, chat about the donuts, and she would have an audience. Now, the protocol was clear. People went to the kitchen, took a donut, and gave her a brief, polite, "Thanks, Ella," on their way back to their desks. No one lingered, no one made small talk. It was the polite acknowledgement you'd give a vending machine. The interaction was purely transactional. Donut received, thanks dispensed, end of social contract. She stood in the kitchen for almost an hour, clearly hoping someone would stay and talk. No one did. You could see the frustration building in her face. The gesture had completely failed to buy her the social currency she was looking for. She tried other things. She'd start complimenting people's work in an overly effusive way. "Lee, that presentation you made was absolutely brilliant, a real game changer." Lee would just nod and say, "Thanks, I appreciate the feedback," and immediately put his headphones back on. The compliments were like water off a duck's back. Acknowledged, but not absorbed. They generated zero warmth. After a couple of weeks of her failed kindness campaign, she started to get desperate. The positive attention-seeking wasn't working, so she reverted to what she knew best: provocation. But this time, she had to escalate. The old tricks weren't getting a reaction. I remember one afternoon, she stood up and announced to the whole office that the air conditioning was a tool of the patriarchy. She had apparently read an article claiming that office temperatures are set to the metabolic rate of men, making women uncomfortable. She declared that our office was a prime example of systemic sexism in action. She stood there, arms crossed, waiting for the fireworks. In the past, this would have been a 5-alarm fire. Arguments, debates, someone calling her ridiculous, her firing back. It would have been the main event. Now, Clyde didn't even look up from his screen. He just put on a sweater. A couple of other guys did the same. No one said a word. We just silently adjusted to the patriarchal temperature. Her grand pronouncement was met with the deafening sound of people putting on cardigans. It was the most humiliatingly effective shutdown I've ever seen. She was trying to start a war, and we were just responding with sensible layering. You could see something break in her that day. She was starting to understand that this wasn't an accident. This was a coordinated effort. This wasn't her victory. This was a wall. Her work began to suffer. She'd miss deadlines, make simple mistakes. She spent more and more of her day just staring at her screen or scrolling endlessly through her phone. She was a ghost at her own desk. Her whole purpose in the office had been to be a social force, a disruptor. Now that she was successfully neutralized, she didn't seem to know what her role was anymore. Her physical appearance started to change too. Nothing dramatic, just small tells. She started looking tired all the time. The smug, confident energy she used to radiate was gone, replaced by a kind of weary bitterness. The worst part for her, I think, was her complete and total social isolation. We never excluded her from work things. She was always CC'd on the relevant emails, invited to the mandatory meetings. But the entire social fabric of the office was now rewoven without her. If a group of us were ordering lunch, no one would think to ask her. Not out of malice, but because the habit of not engaging her in non-work conversation was so ingrained. She'd watch us all gather to get our food deliveries, laughing and talking, and she would just be sitting at her desk, alone with her sad little salad. It was a perfect mirror of the isolation she had imposed on Lee that first week, but on a much larger scale. I think her last hope was when the company hired a new woman for the accounting department. We all saw Ella's eyes light up on the new hire's first day. An ally, a fresh recruit for her army of one. Ella immediately descended on the poor woman, trying to befriend her, showing her the ropes, and no doubt poisoning her mind with stories of the toxic men in the office. For the first week, it looked like it might work. The two of them would go to lunch, chat by the coffee machine. But the new girl was smart. She could clearly sense the strange, invisible wall around Ella. She saw that the rest of the office was collaborative and friendly with each other, while everyone was strictly professional with Ella. It doesn't take a genius to figure out who the common denominator is. After about 2 weeks, the new hire started politely distancing herself. She started joining the larger group for lunch. She'd ask the rest of us for help. She chose to integrate with the functioning, healthy part of the office culture. That was probably the final nail in the coffin for Ella. When she lost the potential ally, she lost her last hope of breaking the quarantine. The dam finally broke on a Thursday evening, sometime in the winter, because it was already dark outside. Most people had already gone home. It was just me, Clyde, and a couple of others finishing up a project. And Ella. She had been sitting at her desk, not working, just staring at her monitor for the last hour. As Clyde stood up to put on his coat, she made her move. She walked over and stood in front of his desk, blocking his exit. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was trembling a little. Clyde just looked at her calmly. "Is this about a work matter, Ella?" The standard disengagement line. "No, it's not," she snapped. "It's about the hostile work environment you've created." Clyde just raised an eyebrow. "Hostile? I don't think I understand. We've all been very professional." That's when she lost it. Not screaming or yelling. It was a tirade, but it was delivered in this shaking, desperate voice. She accused him of leading a coordinated bullying campaign against her. She said we were ganging up on her, isolating her, using psychological warfare. She used all the buzzwords: gaslighting, mobbing, creating a toxic space. She was trying to frame us as the aggressors, using the very language she had taught us to fear. The few of us left in the office had stopped what we were doing, watching this all go down. Clyde let her finish. He listened patiently to her entire speech, his expression never changing. When she was done, breathing heavily, he waited a moment before he spoke. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence of the office. He told her he was sorry she felt that way, but that her perception was incorrect. He said, "Ella, for 2 years, you have lectured us." He reminded her of the time she shamed Lee for talking about his dad. He reminded her of the constant complaints about our language, our jokes, our conversations. He reminded her of the time she accused me of mansplaining for simply doing my job. He laid it all out, not with anger, but with cold, hard facts. "You made it clear," he said, "that any interaction with you that wasn't strictly professional was a potential HR violation. You told us, in 100 different ways, that you found our normal social behavior to be offensive and problematic." She opened her mouth to argue, but he held up a hand. "So we listened," he continued. "We took your complaints to heart. We decided to give you exactly what you said you wanted." He looked her right in the eye. "We created a space around you that is 100% professional, 100% safe. There are no microaggressions. There are no off-color jokes. There is no toxic small talk. We only discuss work with you. We are simply respecting the boundaries that you, yourself, established." He paused for a second. "This isn't a hostile environment, Ella. This is the environment you built. We're just living in it." Ella just stared at him. The color drained from her face. Every weapon in her arsenal had just been turned against her. She had been perfectly, logically, and completely defeated with her own ideology. There was nothing she could say. What could she possibly argue? That she actually liked the attention from the jokes she claimed to hate? That she missed the small talk she had labeled as toxic? That her crusade for a professional workplace was a complete sham, and all she ever wanted was to be the center of attention? Admitting any of that would mean admitting her entire persona was a lie. So, she said nothing. She just stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity. Then she slowly turned, walked back to her desk, gathered her things, and left without another word. That was the end. The fight was over. The next day she came into work and was a completely different person. The fire was gone from her eyes. She didn't speak to anyone unless she was spoken to. She did her work. She went home. She became a ghost, a non-entity. That was almost a year ago. She still works here. The office culture eventually bounced back. The old friendly atmosphere returned, maybe even stronger than before, because we all went through that weird time together. We talk, we joke, we go for drinks. It's a team again. But there's still that invisible wall around her. It's not enforced anymore. It's just there, a habit. We're not mean to her. If she asks a direct work question, we answer it. But the social part is gone forever. Sometimes I look over at her desk, and she's just sitting there in her self-imposed silence. She got exactly what she demanded, a world without any male toxicity, a world of pure, sterile professionalism, a world where no man will ever bother her with a stupid joke or a casual conversation again. She won, and now she has to live with it.